Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Tori. T-O-R-I, Tori. The setup is a little different today. Typically, I really like videos that are like darker, and so I like to film at night, but I thought it would be nice to switch it up. So, yeah. So today I am going to be reading part of a book, kind of like a bedtime story type feel. My dad used to read this book to my little brother and I, before bed. Obviously, like, not the whole book because it's pretty long, but yeah, so I thought it would be fun. So the book is My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George, or Jean, don't know which way it is, but it is about this boy whose family lives in New York, and he decides to run away and go live in the Catskill Mountains. And as a kid, I used to think it was so cool. So, yeah, I thought it'd be fun to read some of it. Before I start, though, thank you guys so much for 50 subscribers. Like, that's crazy that 50 people want to watch me do this, so thanks. But yeah, let's get started. The first chapter is titled, "In which I hole up in a snowstorm. I am on my mountain in a tree home that people have passed without ever knowing that I am here. The house is a hemlock tree 6 feet in diameter and must be as old as the mountain itself. I came upon it last summer and dug and burned it out until I made a snug cave in the tree that I now call my home. My bed is on the right as you enter and is made of ash slats and covered with deerskin. On the left is a small fireplace about knee-high. It is made of clay and stones. It has a chimney that leads on to smoke out of a knothole. I chipped out 3 other knotholes to let fresh air in. The air coming in is bitter cold. It must be below 0 outside, and yet I can sit here inside my tree and write with bare hands. The fire is small too. It doesn't take much fire to warm this tree room. It is the 4th of December, I think. It may be the 5th. I am not sure because I have not recently counted the notches in the aspen pole that is my calendar. I have been too busy gathering nuts and berries, smoking venison, fish, and small game to keep up with the exact date. The lamp I am riding by is deer fat poured into a turtle shell with a strip of my old city trousers for a wick. It snowed all day yesterday and today. I have not been outside since the storm began, and I am bored for the first time since I ran away from home 8 months ago to live on the land. I am well and healthy. The food is good. Sometimes I eat turtle soup, and I know how to make acorn pancakes. I keep my supplies in the wall of the tree in wooden pockets that I chopped myself. Every time I have looked at those pockets during the last 2 days, I have felt just like a squirrel. Which reminds me, I didn't see a squirrel one whole day before that storm began. I guess they are holed up and eating their stored nuts too. I wonder if the Baron, that's the wild weasel who lives behind the big boulder to the north of my tree, is also denned up. Well, anyway, I think the storm is dying because the tree is not crying so much. When the wind really blows, the whole tree moans right down to the roots, which is where I am. Tomorrow, I hope the Baron and I can tunnel out into the sunlight. I wonder if I should dig the snow, but that would mean I have to put it somewhere, and the only place to put it is in my nice snug tree. Maybe I can peck it with my hands as I go. I've always dug into the snow from the top, but never up from under. The Baron must dig up from under the snow. I wonder where he puts what he digs. Well, I guess I'll know in the morning. When I wrote that last winter, I was scared and thought maybe I'd never get out of my tree. I had been scared for 2 days, ever since the first blizzard hit the Catskill Mountains. When I came up to the sunlight, which I did by simply poking my head into the soft snow and standing up, I laughed at my dark fears. Everything around me was white, clean, shining, and beautiful. The sky was blue, blue, blue. The hemlock grove was laced with snow, and meadow was smooth and white, and the gorge was sparkling with ice. It was so beautiful and peaceful that I laughed out loud. I guess I laughed because my first snowstorm was over and it had not been so terrible after all. Then I shouted, "I did it!" My voice never got very far. It was hushed by the tons of snow. I looked for signs from the Baron Weasel. His footsteps all over the boulder, also slides where he had played. He must have been up for hours, enjoying the new snow. Inspired by his fun, I poked my head into my tree and whistled. Frightful, my trained falcon flew to my fist, and we jumped and slid down the mountain, making big holes in trenches as we went. It was good to be whistling and carefree again, because I was sure scared by the coming of that storm. I had been working since May, learning how to make a fire with flint and steel, finding what plants I could eat, how to trap animals and catch fish, all this so that when the curtain of a blizzard struck the Catskills, I could crawl inside my tree and be comfortably warm and have plenty to eat. During the summer and fall, I had thought about the coming of winter. However, on that 3rd day of December, when the sky blackened, the temperature dropped, and the first flakes swirled around me, I must admit that I wanted to run back to New York. Even the first night I had spent out in the woods, when I couldn't get the fire started, was not as frightening as the snowstorm that gathered behind the gorge and mushroomed up over my mountain. I was smoking 3 trout. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. I was busy keeping the flames low so they would not leap up and burn the fish. As I worked, it occurred to me it was awfully dark for that hour of the morning. Frightful was leashed to her tree stub, and she seemed restless, pulling at her tethers. Then I realized the forest was dead quiet. Even the woodpeckers that had been tapping around me all morning were silent. The squirrels were nowhere to be seen. The juncos and chickadees and nuthatches were gone. I looked to see what the Baron Weasel was doing. He was not around. I looked up. From my tree, you can see the gorge beyond the meadow. White water pours between the black boulder and cascades into the valley below. The water that day was as dark as the rocks. Only the sound told me it was still falling. Above the darkness stood another darkness, the clouds of winter, black and fearsome. They looked as wild as the winds that were bringing them, and I grew sick with fright. I knew I had enough food. I knew everything was going to be perfectly all right, but knowing that didn't help. I was scared. I stamped out the fire and pocketed the fish. I tried to whistle for frightful, but couldn't purse my shaking lips tight enough to get anything out, but so I grabbed her by the hide straps that were attached to her legs, and we dove through the deerskin door into my room in the tree. I put Frightful on the bedpost and curled up in a ball on the bed. I thought about New York and the noise and the lights and how a snowstorm always seemed very friendly there. I thought about our apartment too. At that moment, it seemed bright and lighted and warm. I had to keep saying to myself, there were 11 of us in it, Mom, Dad, 4 sisters, 4 brothers, and me, and not one of us liked it, except perhaps little Nina, who is too young to know. Dad didn't even like it, even a little bit. He had been a sailor once, but when I was born, he gave up the sea and worked on the docks in New York. Dad didn't like the land, he liked the sea, wet and big and endless. Sometimes he would tell me about great-grandfather Gribley, who owned land in the Catskill Mountains and felled the trees and built a home and plowed the land, only to discover that he wanted to be a sailor. The farm failed, and great-grandfather Gribley went to the sea. As I lay with my face buried in the sweet, greasy smell of my deerskin, I could hear Dad's voice saying, "That land is still in the family's name. Somewhere in the Catskills is an old beach with the name Gribley carved on it. It marks the northern boundary of a Gribley's folly. The land is no place for a Gribley." "The land is no place for a Gribley," I said. "The land is no place for a Gribley, and yet here I am 300 feet from the beach with Gribley carved on it." I fell asleep at that point, and when I awoke, I was hungry. I cracked some walnuts, got down the acorn flour I had pounded with a bit of ash to remove the bite, reached out the door for a little snow, and stirred up some acorn pancakes. I cooked them on top of a tin can, and as I ate them, smothered with blueberry jam, I knew that the land was just the place for a Gribley. I left New York in May. I had a penknife, a ball of cord and axe, and $40, which I had saved from selling magazine subscriptions. I also had some flint and steel, which I had bought at a Chinese store in the city. The man in the store had showed me how to use it. He had also given me a little purse to put it in and some tinder to catch the sparks. He had told me that if I ran out of tinder, I should burn cloth and use the charred ashes. I thanked him and said this is the kind of thing I am not going to forget. On the train north to the Catskills, I unwrapped my flint and steel and practiced hitting them together to make sparks. On the wrapping paper, I made these notes. A hard, brisk strike is best. Remember to hold the steel in the left hand and the flint in the right, and hit the steel with the flint. The trouble is the sparks go every which way. And that was the trouble. I did not get a fire going that night, and as I mentioned, this was a scary experience. I hitched rides into the Catskill Mountains. At about 4 o'clock, a truck driver and I passed through a beautiful dark hemlock forest, and I said to him, "This is as far as I am going." He looked all around and said, "You live here?" "No," I said, "but I am running away from home, and this is just the kind of forest I have always dreamed I would run to. I think I'll camp here tonight." I hopped out of the cab. "Hey boy," the driver shouted, "are you serious?" "Sure," I said. "Well now, ain't that something? You know, when I was your age, I did the same thing. Only thing was I was a farm boy and ran to the city, and you're a city boy running to the woods. I was scared of the city. Do you think you'll be scared of the woods?" "Heck no," I shouted loudly. As I marched into the cool, shadowy woods, I heard the driver call to me, I'll be back in the morning if you want to ride home." He laughed. Everybody had laughed at me, even Dad. I told Dad that I was going to run away to Great-Grandfather Gribley's land, and he had roared with laughter and told me about the time he had run away from home. He got on a boat headed for Singapore, but when the whistle blew for departure, he was down the gangplank and home in bed before anyone knew he was gone. Then he told me, "Sure, go try it. Every boy should try it once." I must have walked a mile into the woods until I found a stream. It was a clear, athletic stream that rushed and ran and jumped and splashed. Ferns grew along its bank, and its rocks were upholstered with moss. I sat down, smelled the piney air, and took out my penknife. I cut off a green twig and began to whittle. I'd always been good at whittling. I carved a ship once that my teacher exhibited for parents' night at school. First, I whittled an angle on one end of the twig. Then I cut a smaller twig and sharpened it to a point. I whittled an angle on that twig and bound the two angles face to face with a strip of green bark. It was supposed to be a fish hook. According to a book on how to survive on the land that I read in the New York Public Library, this was the way to make your own hooks. I then dug for worms. I had hardly chopped the moss away with my axe before I hit frost. It had not occurred to me that there would be frost in the ground in May, but then I had not been on a mountain before. This did worry me, because I was depending on fish to keep me alive until I got to my great-grandfather's mountain, where I was going to make traps and catch game. I looked into the stream to see what else I could eat, and as I did, my hand knocked a rotten log apart. I remembered about old logs and all the sleeping stages of insects that are in it. I chopped away until I found a cold, white grub. I swiftly tied a string to my hook, put the grub on, and walked up the stream looking for a very good place to fish. All the manuals I had read were very empathetic about where fish lived, and so I had memorized this. In streams, fish usually congregate in pools and deep, calm water, the heads of riffles, small rapids, the tail of a pool, eddies below rocks or logs, deep undercut banks in the shade of overhanging bushes, all are very likely places to find fish. This stream did not seem to have any calm water, and I must have walked 1,000 miles before I found a pool by a deep undercut bank in the shade of overhanging bushes. It actually wasn't that far. It just seemed that way because as I went looking and finding nothing, I was sure I was going to starve to death. I squatted on this bank and dropped in my line. I did so want to catch a fish. One fish would set me upon my way, because I had read how much you could learn from one fish. By examining the contents of its stomach, you can find what the other fish are eating, or you can use the internal organs as bait. The grub went down to the bottom of the stream. It swirled and hung still. Suddenly, the stream came to life and rode back and forth around in a circle. I pulled it with a powerful jerk. The hook came apart, and whatever I had went circling back to its bed. Well, that almost made me cry. My bait was gone, my hook was broken, and I was getting cold, frightened, and mad. I quickly whittled another hook, but this time I cheated and used string to wind it together instead of bark. I walked back to the log and luckily found another grub. I hurried to the pool, and before I knew it, I flipped a trout out of the water. The fish flopped. I threw my whole body over it. I could not bear to think of it flopping itself back into the stream. I cleaned it like I had seen the man at the fish market do, examined its stomach, and found it empty. This horrified me. What I didn't know was that an empty stomach means the fish are hungry and will eat about anything. However, I thought at the time that I was a goner. Sadly, I put some of the organs on my hook, and before I could get my line to the bottom, I had another bite. I lost that one, but got the next one. I stopped when I had 5 nice little trout and looked around for a place to build camp and make a fire. It wasn't hard to find a pretty spot along that stream. I selected a place besides a mossy rock and a circle of hemlocks. I decided to make a bed, before I cooked. I cut off some boughs for a mattress, then leaned some dead limbs against the boulder and covered them with hemlock limbs. This made a kind of tent. I crawled in, lay down, and felt alone and secret and very excited. But the rest of this story. I was on the northeast side of the mountain, and it grew dark and cold early. Seeing the shadows slide down on me, I frantically ran around gathering firewood. This is about the only thing I did right from that moment until dawn, because I remembered that the driest wood in a forest is the dead limbs that are still on the trees. I gathered an enormous pile of them. That pile must still be there, for I never got a fire going. I got sparks, sparks, sparks. I even hit the tinder with the sparks. The tinder burned all right, but that was as far as I got. I blew on it. I breathed on it. I cupped it in my hands, but no sooner did I add twigs than the whole thing went black. Then it got too dark to see. I clicked steel and flint together, even though I couldn't see the tinder. Finally, I gave up and crawled into my hemlock tent, hungry, cold, and miserable. Okay. I hope that was relaxing. Let me know if you guys want me to keep reading, or I can read something else, or if this just wasn't your style, that's fine too. So, I hope that you have a great